Welcome to this week's edition of Ask WWN. I'm your host, Michael Burgess. Our first question is, I just read where Jim Ross said in an interview if he had any regrets in his career, it would be to call The Undertaker's final match, whenever that might be. With that said, do you feel that WWE and or Undertaker himself would call on JR to call that match? Well, I see nothing in WWE's treatment of Jim Ross that would allow for him to come back to call The Undertaker's final match, whenever that might be. I am in complete disagreement with the way JR was treated and forced into retirement. If it truly was the 2K Sports panel that got JR pushed out, that's just ridiculous. I spoke with people in attendance with that 2K symposium, and they told me that it was a hoot, and it was one of the most entertaining things they've ever seen. And this is just typical of WWE overreaction and injustice to the best play-by-play man of all time. And it doesn't surprise me, but it is truly a shame. Our next question. What do you think about TNA letting Hulk Hogan walk and investing the money spent on him in some other talents such as AJ Styles? I think Dixie Carter views Hulk Hogan as an integral piece of what they are trying to accomplish, and Carter and the powers that be in TNA see Hogan as the face of the company and want to build and market around him. Hogan is the most recognizable name in the history of pro wrestling, and our own vision or version of Michael Jordan, basically, for wrestling. But I personally do not feel he has been worth the heavy investment that TNA has put in him. Hulk Hogan is done with wrestling. He's done being in the ring. He's just there for on-screen appearances. TNA shouldn't have put all this money into Hulk Hogan. They shouldn't have. That was their mistake. And right now, a lot of people are paying for it. Our next question is, I loved the attack by Cody and Dustin Rhodes on this past Raw. However, it is really bothering me that Dustin was out there in his gold dust paint. After last week's retirement of Dusty, I wanted it to feel like this was very serious, but the face paint took a lot away from the attack. If he continues as Goldust and not as Dustin, the story will not feel as real. What are your thoughts? Well, the gold dust face paint was goofy, and it did take away from the realism of the angle. And, you're right on the money on that. You're right. So are we supposed to believe that in the midst of all the anger and frustration that Dustin took the time to do his gold dust face paint prior to showing up in the crowd at Raw? This is probably Vince. And, he thought it would... Sorry about that. Back to our question. Having some technical difficulties here during this live broadcast. I apologize for that. But moving on through that question, if we can find our spot again. Vince probably thought it was the only way fans would recognize him, but I saw it as a counter-initiative. And really, the biggest problem I have with the McMahon's angle is that Triple H and Stephanie McMahon appear unstoppable. Even if Daniel Bryan wins at Battleground, what stops them from reversing the decision? There has been too much booking on the fly and not enough thorough planning in this program. Our last question. Why not put Ezekiel Jackson and Mason Ryan with Mark Henry and form the world's strongest stable? Well, let's put aside for a minute that Ezekiel Jackson is currently rehabbing his injury. But, does WWE really need another three-man faction? They have the Shield and the Wyatts. I don't think it's needed, and I think it would be a waste of storyline. Well, thank you for tuning in to this week's edition of Ask WWN. I am Michael Burgess.